The Stikine River Valley. This is where I grew up. In the early 80s, BC Hydro decided to build 2 huge hydroelectric dams, which would have wreaked havoc on this pristine ecosystem. The Tahltan First Nation and settlers in the area, including my family, joined forces with environmental groups like the Western Canada Wilderness Committee and the Sierra Club to challenge the BC government and stop the project. We won! Ever since this childhood experience, I've believed that grassroots activism could work, that Canada's political system provided a reliable framework which leveled the playing field between corporations' entrenched power and citizens' activism. In short, that it was fair. I felt we were on the right track to a more promising future. After university in 1995, I left Canada to go traveling. I left a country divided over First Nations land rights, destructive logging and mining practices, and climate change. Still, I thought awareness of environmental and social issues was on the rise, and that the Green Party would ride that movement all the way to Ottawa to become a substantial opposition force as they were in Germany, New Zealand, or Australia. The perception of Canada conveyed to me when I first went traveling was a bastion of rational neutrality, a leader in environmental issues, a peacekeeper, and a strong supporter of human rights. In 2011, having traveled widely and lived abroad for 16 years, I returned to a country with a very different reputation.
Whatever reputation we might have had, we've started to sink.
Canada has gone from being highly respected for its climate policy to being a disgrace.
Right now, I would advise that Canadian kids sew a US flag on your backpack.
From the development of the tar sands to Canada's withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol to its stance on international conflicts, Canada was showing a new face. I was living in the politically charged city of Berlin, where a healthy culture of vigorous political debate is an ever-present element of life. When I decided to return home to Canada, I fully expected to find a country in turmoil and outrage with a roaring Green opposition. I came from Germany, where there are 68 Green members of Parliament, to Canada, where there is 1. Of course, there are conflicting ideas how Canada should be run, but I was surprised how little opposition there seemed to be at the political level. Was it apathy?
I wanted to find out why Canadians wouldn't vote for parties or politicians who would fight to take Canada in a different direction.
I put this question to Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party of Canada and Canada's first Green Party Member of Parliament, elected in 2011.
Only our electoral system. It's only a question. If Germany had the same voting system as Canada, I think you'd have just as much trouble getting a Green Party person elected.
Wait a minute, asked the boy raised up north, where the promise of great wealth, or at least abundant jobs, is the carrot corporations hold out to residents. Aren't voters just protecting their financial interests as they see them? The environment be damned. Don't Canadians support politicians and policies which protect raw resource industries because they believe that is the source of Canada's wealth, their job security?
Only our electoral system.
The Canadian electoral system is essentially inherited from the British one. Places were represented rather than ideas or persons or parties or concepts. The system itself is dead simple, right? 1 member per district, and you win the district by getting more votes than anybody else. 2008, the Greens got a share of the national vote, which is actually quite comparable to many Green parties in Europe, and they got nothing for it.
And that's the central criticism of the Canadian electoral system. 1 member, 1 district means no matter how many supporters a party has, they must win a majority in a district to send a representative to Parliament. The alternative, proportional representation, is achieved by using a formula to divide parliamentary seats according to the national popular vote. Let's take a look at Germany's electoral system to see how that can work.
Any form of proportional representation requires multi-member districts.
Multi-member districts means that each riding sends more than 1 representative to Parliament. This is a ballot from the German federal election. On the left, you see a list of candidates in your constituency. On the right, a list of political parties. Here's a simplified hypothetical model. In this hypothetical land, there are 50 ridings and 100 seats in Parliament. There are 3 parties, 2 larger and 1 smaller, red, blue, and green. Your ballot has 2 sides, just like the German one. On the left, you can see the candidates in your riding, in this case, 1 from each party. On the right, 3 parties are listed. Your first vote is for the regional candidate of your choice, and your second vote is for a party. In this hypothetical election, red wins in 30 ridings and blue in 20 ridings. Green doesn't win any ridings. Red gets 30 seats, blue gets 20 seats. The second vote breaks down proportionally across the country. Thus, red wins 55%, blue wins 35%, and green wins 10%. The remaining 50 seats are then divided up amongst the parties so that the total of seats matches the total percentage of the second vote. Red adds 25 to their 30 seats to make 55 seats, blue adds 15 to their 20 seats to make 35 seats, and green sends 10 of their candidates to Parliament.
Parties like the Greens do particularly badly in territorially focused electoral systems. The core logic of the system is actually not about fair representation. The point is to identify a winner. There are some interests that are concentrated. There are other interests that are dispersed. Nothing is more dispersed as an interest than the environmental interest, right? It's the air we breathe.
To put it more prosaically, Green voters are spread out more or less evenly across Canada, inevitably creating a minority in each riding. In contrast, the Bloc Québécois received just a little bit more of the popular vote at 10% in 2008, but since those votes were concentrated regionally in Quebec, they created a majority in most ridings.
This is the argument against proportional representation. You may wind up with a parliament that is massively representative, but it can't do anything.
The question then, is the possible decrease in decisiveness worth the increase in fairness and open debate? Another argument against representation is Canada's sheer size.
Germany's a big country, but Canada is an enormous country. Could you imagine Canadians reconciling single-member districts, which would be inescapably about twice as large as they are now, with another body of seats which goes from Atlantic to Pacific? The geographic scale on which votes are being counted is just going to be larger than it is now. That's actually a big problem.
The big problem with Canada's vast geography comes when we define issues and interests territorially with unique aspects best understood by someone from the region. Yet in Germany, the regional differences between Rhineland, Bavaria, and Saxony are arguably as great as those between Newfoundland, Ontario, and British Columbia.
I think all social changes ultimately come from the ground up. I think it's just the nature of politics that politicians have to represent the interests of the majority if they want to continue to be elected. And frankly, I think it's much more difficult to get governments to act, if you're in a situation like the one we're in Canada, where our system just doesn't accurately represent the people of the country.
How we encourage Stephen Harper to resign or leave office as quickly as possible is something that takes a public mobilization, not just a Green MP.
Are people really apathetic about climate change or Canada's climate and energy environmental policy? I don't think so. I think that people, they trust the government, and maybe that makes them complacent.
We're about to discover what it means to be governed with a stern hand, and it'll be interesting to see whether Canadians put up with it. I'm not very optimistic.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I think we're looking at the conservative century.
The more I learned, the more bleak Canada's future appeared to me. And then some things began to happen. Opposition to pipeline construction and fracking is growing and finding focus. First Nations are idle no more. In a striking echo of my family homesteading on Tahltan territory, friends of mine from the Wet'suwet'en Nation have built a home on their own land. An act of resistance, and yet the most natural thing one could imagine.
My name's Molly Wickham, and I am Gidim Den of the Wet'suwet'en Nation.
Cody from the Haida Nation.
The cabin here that's behind us, we built for resistance against industry, and particularly against Pacific Trails Pipeline that plans to go through our territory. The plan was to build a home out here so we could be occupying our territory.
Leading into the formation of a somewhat informal native sovereign housing throughout the province.
We felt that it was really imminent to get it done right away because of the industry that plans to come through, and we don't know when they're coming through. We don't know if they're going to be starting to drill next week or next month or in 6 months from now.